Professor Marcus Reed adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and smiled at the most terrifying classroom he'd ever had the pleasure of teaching, which, considering his track record, was saying something. "Good morning, class," he said cheerfully, his voice carrying that particular blend of academic enthusiasm and barely contained mischief that had made him legendary at Galactic University. "Welcome to Xenobiology 101, or, as I like to call it, why everything in the galaxy wants to kill everything else." The response was a symphony of predatory satisfaction. Vex, the mantis-like Kitharan in the front row, clicked her razor-sharp mandibles in what passed for laughter among her species, her compound eyes fixed on Reed with the kind of focus usually reserved for cornered prey. Behind her, Gorak the Ursoid, who looked like someone had crossed a grizzly bear with a freight train and then given the result, anger management issues, let out a rumbling chuckle that made the desk vibrate. "Oh, finally," hissed Zila from the back corner, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around a chair that had definitely not been designed with Nagari anatomy in mind. "A class that acknowledges the natural order. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted." Reed nodded sagely, making a note on his tablet. "Excellent point, Zila, though I have to ask, how many of you actually know what category humans fall into?" The question sent a ripple of confused amusement through the classroom. Vex's antennae twitched in what Reed had learned was the Kitharan equivalent of rolling one's eyes. "Seriously, Professor, humans are textbook prey animals. Soft skin, blunt teeth, no natural weapons, poor night vision. They're basically walking snack packs." "With delusions of grandeur," added Gorak, his massive claws leaving gouges in his desk as he gestured. "They build their little cities and pretend they're safe, but any real predator could tear through their defenses in minutes." Reed's smile grew wider, though something about it made the temperature in the room feel a few degrees cooler. "Fascinating hypotheses. I assume you're all here because you want easy credits studying harmless herbivores?" A chorus of affirmative growls, clicks, and hisses filled the air. These weren't just any students, they were the elite of their respective species. Vex was from a family of renowned Kitharan hunters whose kill counts were the stuff of legend. Gorak had personally conquered 3 minor systems, before deciding academia might be more intellectually stimulating. Zyla belonged to the Nagari Assassins Guild, and was only taking classes to better understand her prey psychology. They were apex predators, born and bred, and they'd signed up for what they thought would be the academic equivalent of a nature documentary about rabbits. "Well then," Reed said, closing his tablet with a soft snap that somehow sounded ominous in the sudden quiet, "I think it's time we moved beyond theoretical study. Your first lab practical will be a field observation mission." The predators perked up with interest. "Finally some hands-on learning." "We're going to study human behavior in their natural habitat," Reed continued, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Up close and personal. I want you to observe their social structures, their response to stress, their defensive mechanisms." He paused, that unsettling smile never wavering. "Their hunting patterns." Vex let out a sharp click of amusement. "Hunting patterns? Professor, with respect, humans don't hunt. They gather berries and hide in caves." "Do they now?" Reed tilted his head slightly, and for just a moment something flickered behind those mild brown eyes. Something that made Gorak's fur stand on end, though he couldn't quite say why. "Well, I suppose we'll find out, won't we?" The bell chimed, signaling the end of class, and the predators began filing out with the confident swagger of creatures who'd never met anything they couldn't kill. Their excited chatter filled the hallway. Finally, a chance to see some real prey behavior, to study the weak and pathetic humans in their natural environment. As the last student left, Reed remained at his desk, making notes with meticulous care. His handwriting was neat, precise, and if anyone had been able to read it over his shoulder, they might have noticed that his lesson plan looked remarkably similar to a hunting strategy. But that was impossible, of course. After all, humans were prey animals. Weren't they? 3 days later, the class found themselves aboard a university transport ship, heading toward New Harmony Colony, what Professor Reed cheerfully described as a perfect example of human settlement patterns in low-threat environments. Vex pressed her face against the viewport, her compound eyes scanning the approaching planet with predatory interest. "Look at that pathetic excuse for defensive architecture," she clicked to her classmates. "No orbital weapons platforms, minimal shield generators. They're practically advertising their vulnerability." Gorat grunted in agreement, his massive frame squeezed uncomfortably into a transport seat designed for more reasonably sized species. "And look at those cities, all spread out and exposed, no natural choke points, no elevated defensive positions. It's like they want to be invaded." Maybe they do, Zila whispered, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. Some prey species develop a death wish when their population gets too large. Natural selection, you know. Professor Reed, who'd been quietly reviewing his notes in the corner, looked up with that same unsettling smile. Interesting theories. Though I should mention, New Harmony isn't exactly what you'd call a low-threat environment. The predators exchanged glances. Vex's antennae twitched with curiosity. What do you mean, Professor? Oh, nothing too dramatic, Reed said casually, pulling up a holographic display of the planet. Just the usual human hazards. Extreme weather patterns, seismic instability, an ecosystem packed with venomous creatures, radiation levels that would kill most species within hours of exposure. He gestured at the peaceful-looking green and blue world below them. You know, typical human vacation destination material. The transport touched down at New Harmony's main spaceport, and Reed led his confused students into what could only be described as controlled chaos. Humans were everywhere, going about their daily business with a complete lack of situational awareness that made the predator's hunting instincts twitch with excitement. Observe their behavior, Reed instructed, pulling out his tablet to take notes. Notice anything interesting? What the students noticed first was how utterly oblivious the humans seemed to obvious dangers. A group of younglings, human children Reed had called them, were playing some sort of game that involved jumping off increasingly high platforms while their parents watched with what appeared to be pride rather than horror. Look at that, Vex whispered, pointing with one razor-sharp limb. The adults are encouraging the young to engage in self-destructive behavior. Classic prey species population control. But then something strange happened. One of the children missed his landing and scraped his knee on the rough ground. Instead of the expected wailing and panic, the small human examined his wound with scientific interest, wiped off the blood with his shirt, and immediately climbed up to try again, from an even higher platform. Unusual pain tolerance, Reed murmured, making a note. Possibly shock response. Gorak's attention was drawn to a different scene, a human male casually handling what appeared to be highly corrosive chemicals with nothing but thin gloves for protection. The Ursoid's enhanced sense of smell identified at least 3 compounds that would dissolve his hide on contact, yet the human was whistling cheerfully while he worked. Is he enjoying that? Gorak asked, his voice uncertain for the first time since Reed had known him. Humans have interesting hobbies, Reed replied neutrally. Zila's, meanwhile, had slithered closer to observe a heated argument between 2 humans over something called sports statistics. What fascinated and deeply disturbed the Nagari assassin was that neither human seemed to notice the massive construction crane operating directly overhead, or the fact that they were standing in what was clearly marked as a danger zone. They're completely ignoring obvious environmental threats, she hissed back to the group. Either they're too stupid to recognize danger, or what? Reed prompted. Zyla's serpentine form coiled nervously. Or they don't consider those things dangerous. The afternoon continued in much the same vein. The Predator students watched in growing bewilderment as humans engaged in activities that should have triggered every survival instinct in existence. They saw humans casually interacting with local wildlife that bore obvious warning coloration, eating foods that made their chemical analysis equipment scream warnings, and treating potentially lethal accidents as minor inconveniences. But the most disturbing thing was how happy they all seemed. Professor, Vex finally asked, her usual confidence replaced by genuine confusion. Are we sure these humans are actually prey animals? Because their behavior patterns are… Yes, Reed encouraged, his pen poised over his tablet. Insane, she finished weakly. Reed's smile grew wider. Excellent observation, Vex. Now, who can tell me what happens when prey animals are pushed past their breaking point? Before anyone could answer, the spaceport's emergency sirens began to wail. The sirens cut through the afternoon air like a blade, and Professor Reed's reaction was not what his students expected. Instead of the panic or flight response any reasonable prey animal should exhibit, he simply looked up from his tablet with mild interest, as if someone had just announced the weather. Ah, he said pleasantly. Right on schedule. Schedule? Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. Professor, shouldn't we be seeking shelter? Those are attack sirens. Before Reed could answer, the sky above New Harmony Colony erupted in fire and chaos. 3 massive pirate vessels dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls scarred with the kind of battle damage that spoke of serious business. Energy weapons began raining down on the colony's outer defenses, and the sound of explosions rolled across the settlement like thunder. Perfect timing, Reed murmured, making another note on his tablet. Class, I want you to observe very carefully what happens next. This is where we see true human behavior under stress. Gorik's massive frame was already moving toward what looked like a defensible position, every instinct screaming at him to find cover. Professor, with respect, we need to evacuate immediately. Those are Crimson Fang raiders. They don't take prisoners. Oh, I know exactly who they are, Reed replied, his tone still infuriatingly calm. Now watch. The first thing the students noticed was the sound. Not screaming, not panic, not the desperate wails of prey animals facing certain death. Instead, what echoed across the colony was something far more disturbing: human laughter. Excited, eager, almost predatory laughter. What the hell? Zyla whispered, her serpentine form coiled so tightly around a support pillar that the metal was beginning to creak. Across the spaceport, humans were emerging from buildings and cover with expressions that could only be described as enthusiastic. The same male who'd been casually handling corrosive chemicals was now hefting what appeared to be a military-grade plasma rifle with the same cheerful whistle he'd been using earlier. The group of children who'd been playing jumping games were being herded toward safety by adults who looked less concerned and more annoyed at having their day interrupted. Damn pirates, one human woman muttered as she passed the cowering alien students, pausing to check the charge on what was clearly a custom-modified energy weapon, right in the middle of my lunch break. I know, right? Her companion replied, shouldering a rocket launcher with casual familiarity. At least it's not the weekend. Remember last time they showed up during the barbecue? The two humans continued their conversation as they jogged toward the sound of explosions, as if discussing weekend plans rather than heading into a life-or-deathy battle. Professor Reed continued taking notes, his academic demeanor unchanged despite the fact that a pirate fighter had just strafed their position, leaving a crater 10 meters away. Notice the pack coordination, he commented to his terrified students. Observe how they're self-organizing into tactical units without any apparent central command structure. Indeed, across the colony, humans were moving with a fluid efficiency that made Vex's hunter instincts scream warnings. They weren't running around in panic, they were deploying. Small groups were forming, each taking different approaches to the problem. Some headed for heavy weapons emplacements, others began setting up what looked like ambush positions, and a particularly disturbing group was doing something technical with the colony's power grid that was making the lights flicker ominously. This is impossible, Gorik rumbled, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. Prey species don't behave like this. They run, they hide, they submit. Do they? Reed asked, his mild brown eyes reflecting the light from another explosion. For just a moment the mask slipped and the three predators saw something behind those eyes that made their blood run cold. Something ancient, patient, and utterly without mercy. A Crimson Fang dropship landed nearby, disgorging a squad of heavily armed pirates. The raiders were Kreshak, reptilian humanoids known throughout the galaxy for their brutality and combat effectiveness. Each one was armed to the teeth and augmented with military-grade cybernetics. They lasted approximately 30 seconds. The first pirate to emerge from the dropship was immediately set upon by what appeared to be a human maintenance worker armed with nothing but a wrench and an expression of mild irritation. The sounds that followed were not the kind that belonged in any civilized discussion of combat tactics. By the void, Zila whispered, that human just dismantled a Kreshak shock trooper with a piece of construction equipment. Improvised weapons usage, Reed noted academically. Humans are excellent at tactical adaptation. The battle raged around them, but it was becoming increasingly clear that it wasn't really a battle at all. It was a demonstration. The Crimson Fang raiders, despite their reputation and superior firepower, were being systematically outfought, outmaneuvered, and in some cases apparently outsmarted by a bunch of humans who treated the whole thing like an exciting but routine inconvenience. The explosion nearby sent debris raining down around them, and Professor Reed finally stood up, brushing dust off his jacket with the same care he might use to remove lint. I think, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos, it's time for the advanced lesson. The smile he gave his students was no longer mild or academic. It was the smile of something that had just finished playing with its food and was ready to eat. Class, let me properly introduce myself. My name is Marcus Reed, and I'm not actually a xenobiology professor. The three predators stared at their professor as he pulled out what was definitely not a standard academic tablet. The device in his hands looked more like a military command interface, complete with tactical displays and communication arrays that were currently coordinating the human response across the entire colony. You see, Reed continued conversationally, as if he wasn't orchestrating a battle while explosions lit up the sky around them. I'm what humans call a behavioral specialist. I study predator psychology, pack dynamics, and the fascinating ways that apex species react when they encounter something they don't understand. Vex's compound eyes tracked the smooth efficiency with which Reed was directing human forces through his device. Squads were moving in coordinated patterns, supply lines were being established, and what had looked like chaos was revealing itself to be a carefully orchestrated military operation. You planned this, she whispered, her mandibles clicking in rapid succession, the Catharan equivalent of hyperventilating. Oh, absolutely, Reed confirmed cheerfully. Though I should clarify, the Crimson Fang aren't actually here to raid the colony. They're here for a training exercise. Humans get cranky when they don't have regular combat practice, and the pirates needed the money. It's what we call a win-win scenario. Gorak's massive frame was trembling, though whether from rage or terror was unclear. Training exercise? Those explosions are real. I can smell the plasma burns. Well, yes, Reed admitted, ducking slightly as a stray energy blast sizzled overhead. Humans prefer their training to be as realistic as possible. Safety regulations are more like guidelines, really. We find that actual mortal peril improves performance metrics significantly. As if to emphasize his point, a human teenager ran past their position carrying what appeared to be an improvised explosive device, whooping with joy as he headed toward a cluster of pirate positions. The device detonated moments later, and through the smoke came the sound of more human laughter. That's my nephew, Reed mentioned proudly. Just turned 16 last week. This is his first colony defense exercise. He's been looking forward to it for months. Zila had gone completely rigid, her serpentine form locked in what her species used as a defensive posture when faced with something so dangerous that movement might trigger an attack. Professor Reed, she managed to hiss. What exactly are humans? Reed's expression grew thoughtful, as if she'd asked him to explain a particularly complex scientific principle. That's an excellent question, Zila. Your species classifies yourselves as apex predators, correct? Solitary hunters with perfect stealth capabilities and venom that can drop a Kreshak warrior in seconds? Yes, she stammered. Gorak, your people are siege specialists, massive, powerful, nearly indestructible, natural armor, incredible strength, fear nothing in individual combat? The Ursoid managed a weak nod. And vexed Kytharans are persistence hunters with enhanced senses, razor-sharp natural weapons, and reflexes that let you track and kill prey that can't even see you coming? Vex's antennae drooped. That's what we thought, yes. Reed's smile was genuinely warm now, but somehow that made it even more terrifying. You're all absolutely correct. You are apex predators. Magnificent ones, in fact. Each of your species spent millions of years evolving into perfect killing machines. Specialized for your environments, honed by natural selection into instruments of death. He gestured toward the battle raging around them, where humans were treating combat with galaxy-renowned pirates like an amusing afternoon activity. The thing is, Reed continued, humans didn't specialize. We're persistence predators, but we're also pack hunters. We're tool users, but we're also environmental adapters. We're social creatures, but we're also individual problem solvers. We didn't evolve to fill one ecological niche, we evolved to take over every ecological niche we encountered. A pirate dropship attempted to retreat, but found its path blocked by what appeared to be a hastily constructed obstacle course that some enterprising humans had built across the spaceport's main runway. The ship crashed in a spectacular fireball, and Reed made another note on his tactical display. You each represent millions of years of evolution perfecting the art of killing specific types of prey in specific environments, he explained. Humans represent millions of years of evolution perfecting the art of killing everything, everywhere, in any way necessary. The battle was winding down now, with the Crimson Fang raiders surrendering in good spirits. Reed could see human colonists already breaking out what appeared to be medical supplies and refreshments. Apparently it was traditional to provide post-battle care for their training partners. The real lesson here, Reed said, powering down his command interface, it isn't about prey behavior at all. It's about what happens when a species evolves beyond the normal predator-prey dynamic entirely. Humans don't fit into your categories because we've transcended them. We don't hunt for food, we farm our food, and hunt for sport. We don't fight for territory, we claim entire planets and fight because we're bored. We don't kill for survival, we kill for science, for art, for the intellectual challenge of solving the puzzle of how to make something stop existing. Gorak finally found his voice. Then why? Why are you teaching us? Why reveal this? Reed's expression shifted, becoming genuinely professorial again. Because the galaxy is full of species that still think in terms of predator and prey, and most of them are going to encounter humans eventually. Someone needs to update the textbooks. He gestured toward the 3 terrified aliens. Besides, you're not actually prey. You're just, well, let's call you colleagues. Humans have a peculiar fondness for apex predators. We like to study you, understand you, and eventually... His smile took on that unsettling quality again. Befriend you? The way he said befriend made it sound somehow more ominous than any threat could have been. Back in the university classroom 3 days later, the atmosphere had changed completely. Gone was the predatory confidence, the casual arrogance, the assumption of superiority. In their place sat 3 of the galaxy's most feared apex predators, looking like students who just discovered their final exam was actually a practical demonstration of their own mortality. Professor Reed, and he was definitely still Professor Reed, even if everything else about him had been a carefully constructed lie, stood at the front of the classroom with his usual academic enthusiasm. The difference was that, now, his students hung on every word with the desperate attention of creatures who'd realized they were completely out of their depth. So, Reed began cheerfully, pulling up a holographic display. Let's review what we learned during our field observation. Vex, you mentioned that humans appeared to have poor threat assessment capabilities. Would you like to revise that observation? Vex's compound eyes focused on the display, which showed footage from the training exercise. The video captured the moment when her supposedly helpless prey species had turned a pirate raid into what looked suspiciously like an elaborate form of entertainment. Ollie's eyes, I believe I may have misinterpreted the data, she managed, her mandibles clicking nervously. The humans weren't failing to assess threats. They were categorizing the pirates as recreational equipment. Oh. Excellent analysis, Reed praised, and the warmth in his voice somehow made it worse. Humans have a unique relationship with danger. Most species develop fight or flight responses to preserve life. Humans develop fight or flight responses to make life more interesting. He clicked to the next slide, showing a human child's drawing of the battle. Stick figures labeled as pirates were being enthusiastically dismantled by other stick figures labeled as us. The child had drawn smiley faces on all the human figures. This artwork was created by 7-year-old Emma Martinez, who watched the entire battle from her bedroom window. Reed explained, notice the emotional context. To young Emma, this wasn't a terrifying life-or-deathy struggle. It was Tuesday afternoon entertainment. Gorak shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. Professor, if humans are truly apex predators, why do they live in such exposed settlements? No natural defenses, no prepared killing grounds? Reed's smile took on that particularly unsettling quality. Who says they're not prepared killing grounds? Gorak, you're a siege specialist. In your professional opinion, how would you assault New Harmony Colony? The Ursoid considered this, his tactical training overriding his fear for a moment. Standard approach would be orbital bombardment to neutralize defensive installations, followed by airborne assault on population centers, then ground forces to mop up resistance. Sensible strategy. Reed agreed. Now let me show you what actually happened to the last 3 groups who tried that approach. The holographic display shifted to show orbital footage of 3 separate assault attempts on human colonies. Each one followed Gorak's suggested strategy perfectly. Each one ended with the attacking forces being systematically annihilated in ways that defied conventional military thinking. The first group, Reed narrated as the footage played, tried orbital bombardment and discovered that human civilian settlements have shield generators that can withstand capital ship weapons. The second group attempted airborne assault and learned that humans consider anti-aircraft fire a form of community participation. And the third group's footage was particularly disturbing. The attacking force had made it all the way to ground deployment before discovering that the helpless civilians they were facing included retired military personnel who treated the invasion as an opportunity to demonstrate traditional human hospitality, which apparently involved explosives, improvised weapons, and a disturbing enthusiasm for close-quarters combat. Humans don't build obvious defensive positions, Reed explained, because every human settlement is a defensive position. Every civilian is a potential combatant. Every piece of infrastructure is a potential weapon. It's not paranoia, it's civic planning. Zila had been silent throughout the presentation, but now she uncoiled slightly from her defensive posture. Professor Reed, there's something I need to understand. During the battle, I observed human behavior that seemed familiar. pack coordination, tactical efficiency, systematic elimination of threats. But there was something else, something that reminded me of my own hunting patterns. Reed nodded approvingly. Go on. They were enjoying themselves, she hissed quietly. Not just the combat, but the puzzle of it, the challenge. They weren't fighting for survival, they were fighting because they wanted to see if they could win in the most creative way possible. Outstanding observation, Reed said, and for the first time since they'd known him his praise felt genuine, rather than predatory. Zila, you've identified the core difference between human predatory behavior and traditional apex predator behavior. Most predators hunt to survive. Humans hunt to prove they can. He pulled up another slide, this one showing human recreational activities. Images of extreme sports, dangerous hobbies, and what appeared to be humans deliberately seeking out life-threatening situations for entertainment. Humans are the only species in the galaxy that actively seeks out danger for psychological satisfaction, Reed continued. Rock climbing, deep-sea diving, combat sports, exploration of hostile environments. These aren't survival activities, they're entertainment. Humans have turned the act of risking death into a leisure industry. The next slide showed human scientific expeditions, research teams deliberately venturing into environments that would kill most species within minutes, all in the name of curiosity. We're also the only species that will risk our lives for abstract concepts like knowledge, art, or proving a point, Reed added. Most predators have survival instincts. Humans have survival instincts that we actively override whenever something more interesting comes along. Gorak rumbled a question, but surely human offspring are different. Young predators are cautious, protected by adults until they're ready to hunt. Reed's expression became genuinely fond as he pulled up footage of human children engaging in activities that would make seasoned warriors nervous. Human children are worse than the adults. We call it curiosity, but it's really just predatory behavior that hasn't learned to disguise itself yet. Human younglings will attempt to pet venomous creatures, climb unstable structures, and explore dangerous areas specifically because they've been told not to. The final slide showed a graph comparing human expansion rates to other spacefaring species. The human line was a nearly vertical climb that made the other species' progress look like flat lines. In the 200 years since humans achieved interstellar travel, Reed concluded, they've established colonies in environments that other species consider uninhabitable, befriended or domesticated creatures that other species consider nightmarish, and turned conflict resolution into an art form that usually involves explosion. He looked at his three students with something that might have been sympathy. The galaxy spent millions of years developing apex predators specialized for specific environments and prey. Then humans showed up and were apex predators specialized for everything, everywhere, all at once. Vex's voice was barely a whisper. What does this mean for us, for our species? Reed's smile was genuinely warm now, though still terrifying in its implications. It means you have two choices. You can continue thinking of yourselves as the galaxy's dominant predators, and eventually discover that you're wrong in ways that will be educational but unpleasant. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. Or you can accept that there's a new apex predator in the galaxy, and learn to coexist with a species that considers galactic domination less of a conquest and more of a hobby. The classroom fell silent except for the sound of three apex predators contemplating their place in a universe that had just become infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more interesting. The semester's final class arrived with all the fanfare of an execution. Vex, Gorak, and Zila filed into the classroom with the careful, measured movements of creatures who had learned to treat every environment as potentially hostile, a lesson that Professor Reed had taught them more thoroughly than any traditional curriculum ever could. Reed stood at his desk, looking exactly as mild-mannered and academically enthusiastic as he had on the first day. The only difference was that his students now understood what that enthusiasm actually meant. They'd spent the past several weeks learning that human academic interest was functionally identical to predatory focus, and the distinction was largely semantic. Well, class, Reed began, his voice carrying that same cheerful tone that had once seemed harmless and now sounded like barely contained violence. We've reached the end of our semester together. Time for final evaluations and grade assignments. Good. He pulled out what appeared to be a standard academic tablet, though his students now knew better than to assume anything Reed carried was actually standard. The device probably contained tactical assessments, behavioral profiles, and quite possibly targeting data. Let's start with attendance, Reed continued, pulling up what looked like a normal gradebook. Perfect attendance from all 3 students, which is impressive, considering that midway through the semester you all discovered you were attending classes taught by a member of a species that considers psychological warfare a form of pedagogical methodology. Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. During the weeks following the field trip, she'd researched human educational techniques and discovered that their concept of learning through experience often involved survival scenarios that would be considered torture by most civilized species. Participation grades, Reed went on, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. Excellent work from everyone. Vex, your contributions to our discussions on predator-prey dynamics showed real growth, especially after you stopped assuming humans were the prey. Gorak, your analysis of siege tactics improved dramatically, once you understood that human defensive strategies are based on the assumption that everyone is both a potential ally and a potential threat. And Zila, your insights into assassination techniques became much more nuanced after observing human approaches to conflict resolution. Reed paused to make a note on his tablet, and the 3 students exchanged glances. They'd learned to communicate in a sort of shared terror language over the past few weeks. Subtle movements that conveyed concepts like, "Is he planning to eat us?" and "Should we attempt to run?" and "Remember, humans consider fleeing prey behavior triggering." "Now," Reed said, looking up with that devastating smile, "let's discuss your final projects." The students froze. They hadn't been assigned final projects. Vex, your independent study on human child-rearing practices and their implications for galactic security was fascinating, particularly your conclusion that human offspring are essentially weapons in training, disguised as recreational activities. The footage you collected of human children building what they called blanket forts, but which were clearly defensive installations, showed real analytical thinking. Vex stared at him. She had been researching human children, but only out of morbid curiosity after witnessing their casual attitude toward mortal danger. She hadn't realized she was being graded on it. Gorak, your comparative analysis of military doctrine across species was equally impressive. Your thesis that most galactic civilizations prepare for war while humans prepare for entertainment that happens to involve explosives demonstrated a real understanding of human psychology. The tactical breakdown of what humans call paintball was particularly insightful. Gorak's massive frame shifted uncomfortably. He'd been trying to understand human combat techniques by studying their recreational activities, but the more he'd learned, the more disturbed he'd become. Human children played games that would qualify as advanced military training for most species. And Zila, your ethnographic study of human social bonding rituals was groundbreaking. Your observation that humans form emotional attachments to potential threats, then systematically eliminate the threat potential through a process they call friendship was brilliant. The case studies of humans befriending venomous creatures, rehabilitating dangerous predators, and maintaining social relationships with beings that could kill them showed remarkable field research skills. Zila's serpentine form coiled tighter around her chair. She'd been studying human social behavior to better understand their vulnerabilities, but instead had discovered that humans treated potential assassins like potential pets. It was deeply disturbing. Reed tapped his tablet thoughtfully. Based on your performance this semester, I'm pleased to announce that all 3 of you have not only passed Xenobiology 101, but you've qualified for advanced placement in next semester's course offerings. The students exchanged another round of terrified glances. They'd survived 1 semester with a human professor, but the idea of voluntary continued exposure to human education was horrifying. Next semester, Reed continued with obvious enthusiasm, I'll be teaching advanced human psychology, with a focus on the subspecialty that I like to call why humans adopt everything that tries to kill them. We'll be examining case studies of human interactions with hostile xenofauna, aggressive alien species, and naturally occurring phenomena that most civilizations classify as existential threats. The coursework will include field observation of human pet ownership, human approaches to wildlife rehabilitation, and a fascinating human concept of giving things a chance. He pulled up a holographic display, showing what appeared to be a human child cuddling with something that looked like it had evolved specifically to consume human children. Both the human and the creature appeared to be enjoying the interaction. We'll also be exploring the advanced concept of human pack bonding, Reed continued, which is the process by which humans form emotional attachments to literally anything they encounter for more than 5 minutes. The syllabus includes case studies of humans bonding with hostile AI systems, predatory aliens, natural disasters, and abstract concepts like mathematics. Vex found her voice first. Professor Reed, will the advanced course also include practical exercises? Reed's smile grew wider, and for a moment the mask of academic professionalism slipped entirely, revealing something ancient and predatory, and utterly delighted with the question. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I should mention that I've already arranged for next semester's teaching assistant. He gestured toward the classroom door where a small figure was waiting patiently. The three students turned to look, and immediately wished they hadn't. Standing in the doorway was a human child, perhaps 8 years old, with the kind of bright, curious expression that they'd learned to associate with imminent psychological trauma. The child was holding what appeared to be a clipboard and wearing a badge that read Junior Research Assistant. "This is Emma Martinez," Reed announced proudly. "You might remember her from the colony defense exercise. She's been helping me develop curriculum for the advanced course, and she's very excited to meet some real apex predators." Emma waved cheerfully at the three terrified aliens. "Hi. Professor Reed says you're all super dangerous killing machines, which sounds really cool. Can we be friends? I brought cookies." The child held up a container of what were presumably baked goods, though the students had learned never to make assumptions about anything humans offered as food. "Emma will be assisting with practical demonstrations," Reed explained. "Human children are excellent for advanced predator psychology studies because they haven't yet learned to disguise their predatory instincts behind social conventions. Emma has some fascinating theories about pack bonding that she's eager to test." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I've been reading about your species. Vex, did you know that some humans keep giant spiders as pets? They're called tarantulas and they're super fuzzy and nice. Maybe we could find you a fuzzy spider friend. And Gorak, I read that ursoids are really strong, which means you could probably give the best hugs ever. And Zila." The child's expression grew thoughtful as she looked at the serpentine Nagari. "I've always wanted a snake friend. Do you want to see my rock collection? I found some really pretty ones that match your scales." The three apex predators stared at the human child with the kind of existential horror usually reserved for encounters with cosmic entities beyond mortal comprehension. They were looking at their future teaching assistant, a creature that represented the next generation of humanity's approach to galactic dominance, which apparently involved befriending everything in the universe, whether it wanted to be befriended or not. Professor Reed checked his tablet one final time. "Before you leave, I should mention that enrollment for advanced human psychology is entirely voluntary. You're welcome to transfer to other courses if you prefer something less intensive." He paused, his expression becoming genuinely serious for the first time since they'd known him. "However, I should point out that this may be your only opportunity to understand humanity from the inside, as it were. The galaxy is changing, and species that understand humans will have significant advantages over species that don't." The unspoken implication hung in the air like a threat disguised as an opportunity, which the students now realized was exactly what it was. Classic human psychology. Offer a choice while making it clear that only one option led to survival. Vex was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Professor Reed, if we continue with the advanced course, will we learn enough about humans to coexist successfully?" Reed's smile was genuinely warm now, though still terrifying. "Vex, by the end of advanced human psychology, you'll understand humans well enough to survive first contact with our expansion fleets, navigate human diplomatic protocols, and possibly even achieve the ultimate goal of human interaction." "Which is?" Gorak asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Mutual adoption," Reed said simply. "Humans don't conquer other species. We adopt them. The process is usually non-violent, always irreversible, and invariably results in the adopted species discovering that being part of a human pack is simultaneously the most terrifying and most rewarding experience in the galaxy." Emma Martinez nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. "Like when we got our cat. She tried to murder us for the first week, but now she sleeps on my bed and purrs when I pet her." The three apex predators looked at each other, then at the human professor, who had systematically dismantled their understanding of the galactic hierarchy, then at the human child, who was apparently going to continue their education in ways that would probably violate several interstellar treaties on psychological warfare. "We'll see you next semester," Zila said finally, speaking for all three of them. Because really, what choice did they have? In a universe where humans existed, the only survival strategy was to understand them well enough to be adopted by them before someone else conquered them. Professor Reed made one final note on his tablet, then looked up at his students with obvious pride. "Excellent. Class dismissed. Emma, why don't you show our new friends where we keep the good cookies?" As the three former apex predators followed a human child toward what was probably going to be the next phase of their re-education, Professor Reed remained at his desk, updating his files. The final entry in each student's record was identical. Assessment. Subjects have successfully transitioned from potential threats to potential pack members. Recommend continued integration protocols. Note: human adoption process proceeding within normal parameters. He closed the tablet, gathered his things, and headed home to prepare for next semester's curriculum. After all, there were always more apex predators in the galaxy who needed to learn about humanity's approach to making friends, whether they wanted to or not.